Dear Ouino Enterprises, my name is Lamont and I have a YouTube channel about language learning. I would like to test your product for the purposes of a review. Is there any way that I could get a product key so as to offer my honest thoughts? Thanks. Later the same day. Oh look, Ouino replied. Dear Lamont, certainly, we'd love you to review our product. Here is what you asked for. Let me know when your review is complete. I will do that. Kind regards, Tony from Ouino. 2 hours later. This is enormous. 5 months later. Coffee. That's it. Coffee. I've got it. Hey guys, my name's Lamont and here is the most comprehensive review I can manage of Ouino. When I say the most comprehensive I can manage, that is because I don't think you could be completely comprehensive of this program. It is enormous. 5 months ago, I wrote to them and asked them if they would provide me with a copy so I could do a review, and they were very good about it. They got back to me very quickly and they didn't set a time limit on when I had to have the review done by or anything, which is great of them. This review is going to be completely neutral. I do want to thank Ouino for giving me the free copy, but that's not going to affect the way I talk about it. So if I sound like I'm being harsh about something I was given for free, that's just because I'm trying to be honest about it. It's not because I like being harsh about something when they've done me a favor, but I've got good things to say about it and bad things to say about it, so let's get into it. So the reason it's taken me so long to do this is one, that it is just monstrous. It is a huge program, and mentally that was a big hurdle for me because I was like, how do I talk about all of this? But then I kind of realized I don't really have to talk about all of it. I can just give you my thoughts on it. And the other reason it took me a long time is that I try to actually learn languages for real. I'm not trying to make as many videos as I can about it. I'm not trying to pretend I'm learning languages really quickly or anything. I'm trying to actually do it. So when I'm not working, I try to spend at least 2 hours a day on French. And the other thing was, they did give me access to German, Spanish, and Italian, like I said before, but I wasn't heaps keen to try those two thoroughly because I'm very easy to tempt into other languages. Like if I do a little bit of German, it just gets really like, oh, maybe I should learn German, and I don't want to do that. So I've mainly been using the French product. Having said that, I did look at the others to see that they had the same material and the same amount of material, and they do, and that's insane. So first I'll give you my summary of what I think of Ouino down to an extremely simplified, basic, no details kind of version, which is that Ouino has one massive pro and one large but not quite as big, still substantial con, one drawback. The massive pro is that it is probably the most comprehensive, fleshed out language learning program I've ever seen, both in terms of acute explanation. So acute explanation is when you say like, oh, in French, the adjective comes after the noun or something like that, where it actually explains in detail the language to you. And then also in terms of actual material that helps you absorb the language. So that's stuff where it just basically exercises or reading or whatever that you need to do, where you're not trying to actively learn what's going on, you're just trying to absorb the language. So it's one of the most comprehensive, if not the most comprehensive, that I've ever seen in terms of just raw material and their explanation of a language. The big con or drawback, which is not a deal breaker but will be a bigger issue for some users than for others, is that the nicest thing you could say about the design and user experience is that it feels very, very 90s. Now, if you're like me and you grew up through the 90s, then it's great. Great films, great music. Great software is probably not a term that comes to mind. On that sheer mass of content that I mentioned, let's start by talking about that. Most language learning programs go for a little bit more of a target approach. For example, Link is about reading in a language, Linguist is more about building vocabulary, Bokus is about constructing sentences, Duolingo is about threats. Ouino doesn't... Ouino, on the other hand, doesn't home in on one area at all. It is so comprehensive that, in theory, if worked through by someone with a perfect memory, someone who remembered and retained everything they were ever taught, every bit of material, all the pronunciation exercises and everything, then the person would come out at the other end speaking the language fluently. It covers everything: reading, writing, speaking, listening, pronunciation, grammar. Maybe idioms and oral expressions not so much, but other than that, you could possibly describe Ouino as a fully unabridged, annotated bilingual dictionary in digital lesson form. So please be aware that by describing it that way, it's not to throw undue praise at it. I'm not saying that every section is great, and I'm not saying that this program is without its learning flaws. I'm just saving myself the headache of going into depth on every single topic, on every single section that it offers. There's quite a lot of sections that I don't really find useful or I didn't enjoy using, but they are there if you want to. If you're someone who enjoys working through exercises, getting an idea of a concept, and then moving on to the next concept and seeing examples, and then increasing the difficulty in those same concepts, and then seeing more examples, that kind of almost military approach to learning a language, you will enjoy Ouino. They say that if you don't see a breakthrough in 60 days, then they'll give you your money back. The logic is probably that if you don't see a breakthrough, then you've just been using it poorly or not enough or doing things that are too easy. And I think they're probably correct. And also just on that, to get an idea of pricing, basically there are some sort of short-term subscriptions, but they've made it so very clearly the best option to just buy the thing outright. It's like $12 more than subscribing for 1 year, and that unlocks the 60-day money-back guarantee rather than the normal 30-day one. And they say that they'll even offer personal one-to-one advice on your language learning if you ever feel stuck. So they're basically offering to mentor you. So yeah, there are other price tiers, but that's clearly going to be the one that most people go for and the most popular one, which is the same thing. That one's $96 US. Speaking of which, you may have noticed something a little bit different about Ouino. It's a program that you install on your computer. It is not an online platform. You buy the program, you get the program to keep. Now, I know that some people would say, oh, well, I would only use it for 6 months, so for me it's not worth it. Maybe for some people, but for the majority of people, it's just so much simpler to have a program that you just buy and keep. It's your program, like any other purchase. I had a guy ranting on my YouTube channel recently about how Bokus charged him an extra year that he didn't want or something like that, because my YouTube channel is definitely the appropriate place for that. Look, I think everyone preferred it when we just bought things and we got to keep them. I don't think it worked out as well for the software companies, which is why they changed it. But Ouino has not changed it. They've offered us the old school option of buy the program, get the program simple. Also, at least for me, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that for some of you as well, it's good to have a program that functions offline, that you don't need the internet for. In my case, not because I have trouble getting a decent internet connection, but because the internet is distracting. Some people, when they're working, go so far as to unplug their modem, which you cannot do with most other language programs. I've had about 6 days on Ouino in which I would just spend 2 hours engaging with the content on Ouino, just 2 hours straight. I would very rarely, if ever, do that on an online platform. So you buy it once, you disconnect, and you deep dive into the language. Well done, Ouino. So let's talk about some downsides. And I say some because it's not just the graphic design of the program that lets it down. It's also where things are found, like how it's all laid out and what titles certain things are under. Like the titles don't always kind of suggest that that's what you would be doing in that section. It's not exactly clunky, and I wouldn't say that there's a vast technological barrier between you and learning the language, but it's certainly not smooth. And remember, we're dealing with a lot of material here. So you could think of this problem a little bit like running a business. The size of the business is how much material there is. And if it's a small business, it doesn't really matter if the payroll process is inefficient or if their stockroom is messy. But if it's a big business, which we know is in terms of material, the smoothness of the user experience needs to level up to match that. And in terms of material, Ouino has a business that's like the size of Nike or something, and their payroll is still being done in MS Excel. In other words, there's a clear mismatch between the quality and quantity of content and how easily accessible that content is and how good it looks. For example, it's weird and a bit of a shame that some of, not all of, but some of the best material is in a section called Extra Language Practice. And in that section, there are subcategories that sound like they're going to be very similar to the normal categories, but not only are they not really that similar, but they're also better and more comprehensive. And I feel like the term Extra Language Practice needs a name that sounds more necessary, not a name that sounds like just if you feel like doing it on a rainy day. Because if you've been learning the language for longer than about 2 weeks and you're not yet using the Extra Language Practice section, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. Again, I won't go into minute detail, but the Extra Language Practice was my favorite part, in particular the stories. The advanced stories were the most helpful to me. I found the intermediate level ones to be a little bit easy, although still decent, but by that measure, that probably puts the advanced ones at around a B2 level, which is maybe a little bit lower than some people might hope for, but it's still an advanced place to get to in a foreign language. I want to be clear about this because people get really stupidly picky about it. Advanced in a foreign language can mean intermediate because you're quite an advanced learner. It's like you're hoping to reach an advanced level from that. You may not speak the language at an advanced level, which would be like C1 or C2, but if you're at those levels, you're almost not a learner of the language anymore. You're like a speaker of the language. So I'm at somewhere B1 or B2-ish in French, depending on exactly what I'm doing, but I would still describe myself as an advanced learner of the language. So that's the material that I found most helpful on Ouino. Someone like me, that is someone hovering around the kind of late B1, early B2 level, could probably read one of these stories in about 10 minutes, but my preferred approach of study was to read them in depth, to read each paragraph aloud a few times, writing stuff down, trying to get everything as close to the pronunciation as I could, all that kind of good stuff, really engaging with the language, and doing it that way, each story would take me very near to 2 hours. The pronunciation module is also very cool and quite a lot more challenging. I couldn't keep up with the advanced content, and I even struggled with the intermediate ones. But again, I don't really feel like this stuff should be an extra language practice stuff. This should be some of the main content, because if a student can get to a place where they're doing this kind of stuff, this deep, challenging engagement across different facets of the language, then that's going to move them towards fluency a lot faster than what Ouino calls the main content. It's great that the main content is there, but it's too finicky, it's too gritty. You need it a little bit, yes, but you should be aiming to spend as much time as possible with and in the language itself, not with explanations of the language. Using it in a similar kind of way to the way I have been, someone of around my level could probably safely bank on getting about 80 hours of good language learning out of this program. And even that's not bad for less than 100 US, but a total beginner could, if they were smart about it, easily get more than 300 hours out of this program and be learning at a good rate throughout that 300 hours. And speaking of that, one of my favorite features, which again, thanks to the less than great user interface I didn't even discover until about 2 weeks ago. Ouino, if you're listening, and I know you are, make this tab bigger, bolder, more obvious, put it somewhere we can see it. The Progress and Achievements tab. The Progress and Achievements tab is fantastic. Firstly, it's crazy detailed. You did this much X and this much Y and so on. But even better, you can tell it what else you've been doing. Have you been reading a novel in French? Très bien. Maybe you had an Italian lesson on italki. Bravo. You can manually enter these things so that all your learning counts towards your progress rather than just the learning that Ouino can see, which is like every other program. They only count the learning that you've been doing on their platform as learning. Now, I know some people don't really care, but it's no good one person saying to another that they shouldn't care either. Some people want their language study to be like a Garmin sports watch. How much listening, how much reading, how much writing, how much speaking, how much time in this program, how much time in this program. Ouino is the only program I've ever seen that allows you to enter that manually. It's very good. I like it up. Keep it. In fact, do it more obviously. Put it somewhere we can see it. Now, just going back to the design for a minute, I'm sure you've seen the screenshots throughout this review. It's just weird. The typefaces are weird, they're inconsistent, they're not at all in line with what you're actually doing. Like, how come in the listening section you'll type in like ye olde engelski font, but then in the advanced reading it's like Arial narrow black. And then the pictures, they're photos, but they have this cheap oil painting filter applied to them that just takes them into the uncanny valley and makes them that slight bit unpleasant to look at. And I know that there are going to be people who say, well, that makes no difference to language learning. But you've got to understand, people, that it doesn't matter how little your product has to do with aesthetics. It can be a hammer or a screwdriver. If it doesn't give us positive vibes, if we feel confused or even just underwhelmed when we engage with your product, we will not want to use it. Also, why is this street moving? I just want to click on the language and suddenly I'm freaking Neo. And that brings me nicely to range of languages. And this one's always very divisive because either a program has the language you're studying, in which case it has 100% of the languages you need, or it doesn't have it, in which case it's as useless as a lift to Liverpool. Having said that, as if Ouino couldn't get any more 1990s, their range of languages is the big Euro 4. So that is German, Spanish, French, Italian. Like, that is old school. And all jokes and petty comments about how they should have Mandarin or Japanese or Arabic or whatever, from a business point of view, I just can't really see them making a big impact on the language learning world when they are offering 4 very commonly offered languages and presenting it with this graphic design. It may be the most comprehensive language instruction program I've ever come across, but that's not going to matter when it looks like it's 30 years old and is offering languages that every other platform has. My advice to Ouino is therefore, hire a good graphic designer, hire a Chinese linguist or a Japanese one, or both if you can, and rebuild the thing with Asian languages and with awesome graphics. I just realized that coffee thing that I set up at the start and then I've totally forgotten to include later in the review. Okay, so language learning programs can be thought of a little bit like home coffee machines or home coffee at all. So you've got your very, very basic. So like instant coffee, you put it in a cup, you pour boiling water in it, bam, coffee, sort of. Then you've got all the way up to your fully customized things with steam wands and multi-group heads and everything, and you're doing all the stuff yourself. I think the thing with Ouino, and this is sort of where it's great and it's sort of where it's gone a little bit wrong. It's tried to be, and somewhat succeeded in being, all of those things. So it does actually have a sort of handheld version of the program where you can say, I just want you to teach me the language, and it takes you through the way it sees fit from start to finish kind of thing. I didn't try that because that would be very hard for someone like me. I've already learned a lot of the language, but That's what it does for a beginner. That's kind of like more like the instant version, or that's, I guess, like an espresso machine kind of thing, where it holds your hand all the way through the process, and at the end, you will get a decent cup of coffee, or you will learn quite a lot of the language. All the way, but it also has up to like, you know, making your own coffee, like you being a full-on barista. The problem with that is that it's a little bit all over the place and there's stuff everywhere. You can imagine a coffee machine that had all those features, like it was an instant coffee machine, and it was an espresso machine, and it was a low-level home espresso machine, and it was a full barista cafe machine, and about 6 grinders, and all the milk and everything, all in the one place. It's amazing, but just to use it, it's very clunky, and it's just a bit all over the place. So the point is, can you get a good cup of coffee out of Ouino? That is learning the language well. Absolutely you can. Is that a very pleasant experience? I didn't really find it so, but I certainly didn't find it bad. Like I said, I spent like 2 hours on some of the stories, and that was just 2 hours straight. I love that you can go offline and just use it without being distracted by the internet. I love certain features of it, but then it's all wrapped up in this graphic design that's just it's just. So my advice to you guys is, if you are studying or thinking about studying one of those 4 languages and you are B1 or below, then Ouino is definitely worth a look. Like I said, the extra language practice sections are ridiculously helpful for higher level students. Anyone from about A2 to B2 should be able to benefit from them, depending on what level they choose and how they do it. But beginners can choose to study the language from the start and start getting a handle on it piece by piece, and do some of the easier extra language practice sections just to keep themselves interested. The graphic design and the navigation isn't a deal breaker, but it would just be better for us and for them if it were updated. Now, listen up guys, this is not a sponsored video. For one thing, I didn't think it would be fair to Ouino to take 5 months to do their review and then to ask for a kickback from that. And secondly, this means that I can give you the most honest opinion that I have about it. I don't have to massage the truth in any way. You've heard what I think about some sections of it. It's because it's not sponsored. But if you do want to support my work here, and yes, I do mean work, these videos are a lot harder to make than you might think. Firstly, you can like and subscribe, that's always helpful. Secondly, there hopefully will be some links in the description for a Swedish bookshop called Bokus. They will say what they are, but if you're learning Swedish, there's a series of books called LasseMajas Detektivbyrå, which are very helpful and very cheap. They're only about $4 each, but using those links does help me out. And there is another link. There are some other links for the service for, what's it called? Stock music that I use, called SOUNDSTRIPE. If you've noticed here that I always try and customize the music to make it sound as good as I can, then thank you for noticing. I don't use the YouTube free music library. That can actually get you into trouble. Don't do that. So if you're venturing on a creative project, some kind of online thing, which a lot of people are nowadays because of obvious reasons, then check out SOUNDSTRIPE for sure. And this is just my like personal link to them. It does help me out, but this is not like sponsored video, if that makes sense. I really like SOUNDSTRIPE. The things I can do with them, with the music from there is amazing. They're so customizable. You'll never run out of music options from there, and you can search down to really specific things so you can get exactly the track you need really quickly. And say, if I wanted to make this track that you're hearing now and single instrument track only, voila. See, hopefully I can manage that in post. So yeah, use the link in the description is the upshot of all that. Anyway guys, that was my review of Ouino. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a better idea of what kind of a program it is. I know I haven't covered everything, so of course, if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try to get back to them, the questions, as quickly as I can. Also, contact Ouino. They're very helpful. They got back to me very quickly, so I don't think you'll have a problem getting in touch with them. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this. Give it a like and subscribe and all that stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye.